Alright, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, non-binary besties, we have something to talk about, and that is the teen film and why no one respects it. So, when you think of teen film, what do you think of? Personally, I think of Clueless. I think of a variety of TV shows, Riverdale, Euphoria. A lot of people think of the iconic filmography of John Hughes, and those are all very fair associations. However, teen films are beloved by many, and yet respected by few. So why is that? To analyze what makes a teen film, we have to look at where it all started. Some of the characteristics we now associate with teen films root back to the OG rom-coms. These were known as the screwball comedy. These films took off in the mid to late 30s, with the first film of the genre being credited to 1934's It Happened One Night. So it's about this couple that come from two different economic backgrounds, but they learn to overcome their differences and they even eventually fall in love. What we think of now as predictable, they did it first. They were the blueprint. So films like this and My Man Godfrey were films written and reflect the Depression era rom-com. So this becomes a widely popular genre for middle-class America, especially middle-class women, even to the point where some of these films are deemed women's films, which is a different conversation for another time. The thing that I would credit as the predecessor of the teen film is the melodrama. So originally these were silent films that were just accompanied by an organ, hence melodrama. It's a drama with a melody, little on the nose, but whatever. So between these two different genres, we start to see previews of topics, storylines, character arcs, and scenarios that we later see played out in teen films. It's almost like these ideas were repackaged for younger audiences in teen films. As Hollywood took off and became the huge industry that it is today, in the 1960s we see New Hollywood and the shift into the melodrama era. These films are very family-oriented, enforcing traditional family values, especially at a time where America was sort of insecure, if you will, with the Cold War and everything. These films in the 1960s sort of acted as commentary for the current status quo of American society, and as time went on, the target audience became more diverse. In combination of that and also the fact that adults were making more money and therefore could afford to not force their children to work, created the concept of the teenager. Prior to the baby boomer generation, most working class children had to enter the workforce as early as they were legally allowed to, many finding employment at criminally young ages. With the takeover of affluent families and the establishment of middle class America, parents could afford to keep their children in school and even send them off to college for secondary education. Urban areas had theaters that were open 24 hours, and so teenagers could just pay for their one ticket and then watch movies all throughout the night. And it became like a very popular pastime for those who could afford it, and creates this culture around the midnight movie. In the 70s and 80s, teen films coincided with the genre revival, or the period of time in which studios realized there was a lot of money in creating genre films, or genre-based films. These are your films like Star Wars, Jaws, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I guess, that came out in 74. Also around this time, you can see the United States shift and start to recognize the presence of teenagers with student-led organizations such as SNCC. You see this in counterculture, in teenagers doing super rebellious things like driving late at night and listening to Elvis Presley. Or you're finally seeing teenagers create their own sphere of influence within American society, and that is reflected in the films at the time. This carries on into the 80s, where you get possibly one of the most iconic figures within the teen film genre. You get the man, the myth, the legend himself, John Hughes. He just directs banger after banger, 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, all in a row. Along with that, you see teenagers become the protagonists of musicals in films such as Grease and West Side Story, though to be fair, they're not actually played by teenagers. And yet, despite these being household names, they're typically not nominated for award shows or even really recognized by the Academy. Why the disrespect? Is it because these themes are seemingly overdone, or they're too simple and predictable? Maybe it's because these films become a reflection of us at our formative years, with a culture that is obsessed with this very short span of your life. It's strange that this sort of celebration of this era in your life is never respected. This category of film doesn't quite fit into the charming children's films, and yet it's not taken seriously enough to be considered a mature adult film. It's almost like their plot lines, their characters are somewhere in the middle. There's a word for that, actually. A teenager. So next time you put on Clueless, or next time you watch Ferris Bueller's Day Off, maybe think, it's more than just a teen film. It's cinema.